The reason it's important to know this history is because it actually shows us like the motivation and the backdrop behind why, number one, they haven't been able to do a sort of like an origin piece of James Bond, and instead we have James Bond kind of like we understand who he is in regards to his career, but we don't know what's behind him and what drives him, what made him into the man he is. And that's something Michael Wilson has wanted to do, and he was finally able to do it with Casino Royale 2006, and why that film was made the way it's made, with the background and the giving Bond depth. So the reason that the reason for Casino Royale's 2006 isn't because it's a reboot again, but rather it's because it's a start back from the beginning. It's backdrop, it's an origin piece, and originally they just tried to implement that with Dr. No, here's a quote by Michael Wilson about that. This comes from a YouTube video. It's JB Brazil TV, and it is it's the first video. Michael Wilson says, "We were wanting to do Casino Royale, which is the first of the Bond Fleming books, and it's really Bond's first mission. Our company never got the rights because Cubby and Harry wanted to make it, but they never got the rights. It wasn't until a few years ago that we got the rights, and now we have the opportunity, and we really want to do it the right way. And I think it requires a different approach than we've done in the past." And then he says later, he says, "Well, first of all, it was the first book, and second of all, it was really the Bond, the arc in which he becomes Bond. He starts off really having earned his 00 stripes, and at the end of the movie, he becomes the Bond we all recognize, we all know and love." And, well, to be honest, if you think about Bond, where he ends up, now where his view of women, his attitude towards women, his killer instinct and everything else, to arrive at that point, I think you have had to have gone through a fairly tough kind of arc to arrive at that point. The arc we're talking about is what Casino Royale is about. So basically he spells it out right there. He spells it out. Casino Royale is really about only two things. One, doing what they've wanted to do from the beginning of the franchise. And two, it's the beginning of Bond. It's setting the backdrop to Bond, to showing who he is and what he's gone through to become the Bond that we've already known through all the other movies. Saying this, in and of itself, basically debunks the Codename theory altogether, because it's equating Bond as one character. And basically the whole reboot thing, with the idea of, with the definition of reboot being a new timeline, a whole different Bond, this debunks it also, is that there's a connection between the old Bond and this new Bond. And that's what they're trying to explain and show through these new movies, these first four. Again, Skyfall and Spectre, that's what they're showing with the specifically Spectre is the reintroduction for the background of the organization Spectre and Blofeld, and Skyfall and Quantum of Solace are backdrops to other aspects of who Bond is. Now, and I'm going to reiterate this I said in the other videos, so I'm going to go quick with it. The other meaning for the importance for understanding the history is to show that there's different franchises that went after Bond. And the parallel is the same, like just really quickly with Batman. Take, for example, Nolan versus Burton. You wouldn't take Nolan's Batman trilogy and say those are three different Batmans. You just wouldn't. You might say between Nolan and Burton, those two Batmans are different because they're different universes, but you wouldn't say that about them individually, about their own franchises. The same things with Bond. If you want to say Bond is a different character or it's a code name, you can only apply that with different franchises. So with the two Casino Royales, those are actually one franchise. Well, actually they're not, but they're two different franchises. And then you have Never Say Never Again is a different franchise. And then you have the EON franchise. So you have four Bonds there. Okay, that's fine. But within the EON Productions company, you can't do that because it would be the exact same thing as saying the Christopher Nolan Batman in all three of his films is different. That's, if you want to make a proper parallel, that's what you got to do. Moving on. So basically, what kind of happened is Michael Wislund approaches Cubby during the Living Daylights, like 1987, that time frame. And he wants to go back to do Bond's history, and Cubby says no. And the reason being that Cubby doesn't believe that Bond doesn't go back, that he always moves forward. And part of me thinks maybe that has a little bit to do with the Kevin McClory thing, as at the end, or at the beginning of Fear Eyes Only, they basically dump Blofeld, literally, into a smokestack. And, maybe that's a statement, but anyway, once they receive the rights to Casino Royale, Michael Wilson then decides, he's going to go back to what he wanted to do originally, to give Bond depth through the history and the background of Bond, and really he just wants to give Bond a deeper connection with the audience. Here's a couple quotes. They're from Inside the Living Daylights. It's a documentary. These are kind of together, but they're two separate quotes. One is from the narrator, Patrick McNee, and he says, instead of creating a story that deals with Bond's beginnings, the writers return to the source. And then Michael Wilson says, that one of the ideas that we looked at from time to time was the possibility of exploring Bond's roots to show where he had come from, to show his background. He's always been a veteran character. He's been a fellow who's experienced. Cubby felt we really shouldn't look backwards. So Michael actually kind of early on says this around the time of The Living Daylights. So that's basically it for the history. And the next we're going to look at, bear with me, we're going to get back to the chronology. Again, the reason I'm doing this is to set the precedent of foundation for what I'm doing and why the chronology is how I'm lining it up. This isn't going to be all this heady stuff, so eventually we're going to get on to, a little bit more. I'm going to talk about continuity between the bonds. But the next thing that I'm going to talk about is we're going to talk about film theory and how it relates to the Bond franchise for EON Productions. And then we're going to move on. We're going to start talking about the chronology a little bit more in detail. All right? See you later.